Coming up, as promised, we want to make sure with everything that has gone on with the Brooklyn Nets, both on and off the court, to bring in one of the more respected voices covering the Brooklyn Nets, certainly a friend of the show and someone that always offers us great insights. That's going to be Matt Brooks from Nets Daily, also from the Clear Out podcast as well. We'll dive into the Ime Udoka coaching situation, what has transpired to this point, and where the expectations lie for Kyrie Irving and his potential return to the Brooklyn Nets team, and where this season as a whole is going to go. We break that all down coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and let you know that today's episode is going to be brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. And of course, I am your host, Adam Armbrecht, as promised at the top. A great conversation coming up with Matt Brooks from Nets Daily. This was a conversation we had on Monday afternoon ahead of that Dallas matchup with the Brooklyn Nets. So we talk about everything up to that point and also what the road ahead could look like for Brooklyn. Let's dive in. How have you been? Looking as dapper as ever.
Thank you. I've been, like everybody else, been busy and probably a little overwhelmed in certain spots by the many tough subjects that these Brooklyn Nets seem to throw us into: workplace harassment, anti-Semitism. I mean, it's just, it's another year covering the Nets.
That's consistent, if not sometimes violent internally, to try to deliberate how you're going to do it. When you cover a team like this, we're obviously going to get into the Kyrie Irving conversation. We've been covering it on the podcast, updating where things stand with him. I do have a specific question when it comes to where they are now, but just on Ime Udoka, because since it was by Adrian Wojnarowski and then by Shams Charania reported that it was all but assumed that he was going to be the next head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, everything with Kyrie Irving was kind of happening simultaneously, but it was very minute to minute in terms of Steve Nash gets fired. You hear the rumors of Ime. Things start to unravel with Kyrie. And now reported, I think, first by Mark Stein saying strong voices, quote, strong voices. I don't know who those strong voices are, but suggesting that hiring Ime Udoka may not be the way to go for Brooklyn. Where do they stand on that currently? Because at least what seemed like imminent hiring has been paused.
Yeah, I mean, you can literally watch the reporting change throughout last week. It was kind of like, jarring is probably not the right word, but it was pretty noticeable. Like, even just with Woj reporting, his own words kind of shifted throughout the week. I think it's fair to say, first off, like, if we've even just take what's been reported so far, what Ime did was workplace harassment. Like, just because a relationship is consensual doesn't just mean it's like, it doesn't mean there's no workplace harassment there. Like, the second a relationship stops being consensual and somebody's making advances in the workplace, it becomes workplace harassment. I talked about this on the Clear Out, my podcast. I included a link to New York's sexual harassment course. Like, it's very complicated to have a relationship in the workplace. And I think that's why in general, like, it's, especially if you're in a position of power like Ime was, it's just not something you want to do. So
because it's never cut and dry perceptually, regardless of what the angles of it are.
No. And I think that's a good starting block. I also don't think it's crazy to deduce that there's probably a little more to the story than what's been reported. And I feel pretty confident about saying that.
So why did the Nets even get to this point? Like, why was it so far down the line that they were it was obviously far enough that if you're hearing it from Woj and you're getting confirmation from Shams, it's clear that they're close to going down that road. And some people did ask, did they have time as an outside organization to do their due diligence on the circumstances? Did they just kind of take it at face value with the way it was presented coming out of Boston and saying there was a consensual relationship, it went against organizational policy, and the Nets may have a different organizational policy, and that's why there's this path forward? But then you heard that Boston said, yeah, we don't want any compensation in return. And it just seemed like it started to kind of go down this road of saying, maybe we just don't have the full story yet. And it's not going to look great if you continue to go down this path with him.
Yeah, I think that's, I would say like the Nets right now to me are just a really, like a team that's desperate to win.
Yeah.
Like really desperate and has a lot to lose. It has the best player in franchise history to lose. So I'm also not just going to assume that they've done their due diligence and be like, all right, like it's a really, really tricky situation. Maybe there are different things from organization to organization. I don't know, but just the way this is kind of gone in terms of like it being imminent to it scaling it back. And, now Sai's getting this pressure from internal voices. It's just like, it's just kind of more evidence to me that the Nets are a complete and utter mess right now. So I can't in good faith sit here and be like, yeah, I think they did their due diligence. I just don't know. It's just, it's the way the Nets are. It's like just chaos all over the place. So I think that plays into it.
And it's shocking too, given where we thought, the way we perceive this organization leading up to attracting Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant to where they are today. And it's so many of the same figures are all still in place. And it fundamentally seemed like it was built very, very well. And yet, and then all of the issues aside, just we know that once you get superstars, there is a give and take there, or you do sacrifice something organizationally to acquiesce to them. Never to this point, like never to this level. And we'll get to Kyrie in a second here. But they certainly seem like they're at the end of the rope of trying to salvage the last remnants of what was supposed to be a championship run.
Yeah, and especially after the summer of like talking about getting your culture back and all this stuff, it's like this has just been like, it's just seemed like it's been a mess from the top down this year, honestly. Like, and it's kind of just plays back into how they ended last year. It's just there's so many moving pieces, and none of them are really moving in unison.
So obviously on the Kyrie Irving front, we won't reiterate it, not because it isn't serious and severe, just because we've covered it, obviously, as you said too, whether in print or on the Clear Out podcast. But obviously we know Kyrie Irving posts, promotes, however you want to perceive it, some very misinformed and heavily anti-Semitic content on his social media. It takes a bit of a long process for him to get to the point where ultimately he posts his apology. Inside of that timeline, we find out that Joe Tsai had wanted to meet with him, and seemingly Kyrie Irving never returned those calls, those texts, and never sat down with him. We're now at the place here where it was the minimum 5-game suspension, but also the 6 bullet points of apologizing and condemning the film that he promoted, making a $500,000 donation to anti-hate causes. The ADL rebuked his donation over the past couple of days. Complete sensitivity training, complete anti-Semitism training, meet with the ADL and Jewish leaders, meet with the team's owner, Joe Tsai, and demonstrate an understanding of the situation. My biggest question here is Kyrie Irving interested in any of this? Like, is he interested in being a part of this? Because I think what we understand is when he comes out with that apology, it seems to be some understanding that he indicated in the offseason, I had a chance to leave here and the landscape wasn't so bright in terms of suitors. He's 30 years old. He's going to be coming out of his opt-in year. He's going to potentially be a free agent. And from a just marketing standpoint, this is about as bad as you could have started off this season. So there's that side of it. But do we have any indication that he intends to, wants to, and believes that that's something that he should be obligated to do? Because he didn't bother to meet with the owner in the first place. There's no, Doug and I talked about this. We said it's not a 0% chance that Kyrie just flat out walks away and we don't see him in a Nets uniform or maybe any uniform.
Yeah, I mean, that I think who knows is the best way to describe anything with Kyrie at this point. I mean, they've already tried to set up a meeting with the ADL, which is just like a fraction of the things that he has to do, according to what's been reported. And he didn't go to that. He sent representation instead. I think it was his aunt and father, I think, was who went.
Mother-in-law, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, that's what it was. So sure. So like that's a situation where like they kind of tried to, figure out a way to come together and rectify the situation. And it's like, he himself did not go. And now it's like, we need you to do that and 7 other things. And it's like, who knows? I do think like there's enough. I mean, first off, he lost his Nike contract. It doesn't sound like the Lakers wanted anything to do with this right now and anything to do with Kyrie. So it's like, this is it, dude. Like I don't know like how many chances he's going to get after this. If he's lost this Nike contract and the Nets, if he doesn't go to these things, it's like, how is he involved with any team and anything that has to do with the NBA, and how is he to do anything with Nike? It's like, he has a lot to lose here. So part of me says, hey, maybe like the threat of that is real enough for him to like show up to this. But at the same time, it's like, we know Kyrie is somebody that's like, he's very serious about his views. And, even in situations where it's like, oh, they made a donation with the Nets. Like, this looks like we're going to get past this. It's, they have a practice and he shows up and talks, and it's like, oh, this guy isn't remorseful at all about anything that happened. So I think like, even though he apologized on his Instagram, that was one of the stipulations of what, Josiah wanted. And like, it's like, we don't know until we see and see him either, kind of work through this checklist and cross off these things, and really until he like speaks to media or whatever, like makes some sort of public statement that we know is coming from his mouth.
All right, coming up in a second, one more question around Kyrie Irving and his current circumstance and what may be best for him and for the organization. And then we'll talk basketball, though, because while we are recording this on Monday afternoon, the Brooklyn Nets have won back-to-back games and will be taking on the Dallas Mavericks on Tuesday night. Okay, right back into the conversation with Matt Brooks in just a second. But first, gotta tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn. That's because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a huge, high-stakes wager for you and your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs will help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. I can tell you that I have family members who own small businesses, and when they need to turn over their employee base, when they need to bring in the next great hire, they go over to LinkedIn Jobs. They know that they're going to be guaranteed to get the best possible candidates to fill those open spots. Of course, you head over to LinkedIn Jobs, where they'll help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. And it's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality candidates and hires versus leading competitors. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Now, back to the conversation. Okay, so the last question on the Kyrie Irving situation, just your opinion. This isn't about what you think's going to happen. I am of the belief that the best thing for the organization and for Kyrie Irving is that he never plays for the Nets again. I just don't think that it makes sense. I think that the list is now long, and I could make an argument that the best thing even for him and for the team would be to say, don't play anymore this season. We'll take the fallout of whatever that's going to look like contractually and what you're owed versus what we can recoup. And you go to wherever you can go next season, having taken months away where you don't need to necessarily be underneath the scrutiny and the spotlight. And the Brooklyn Nets have to, in spite of their panicked nature of late, accept that this version of this window is closed.
I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I'll be honest, like, it's done. Like, I get that the Nets are playing well. They've won back-to-back games. It's done. Like, the sooner we accept this and just like try to figure out what they're doing next, whether that's a rebuild or a soft rebuild, whatever it is, like, it's time. Like, Durant's playing out of his mind right now. Looks amazing. His leadership has been really good the last 2 games, especially. Like, it's time. This is the time to do it. He's healthy. And, I mean, every little thing, even hiring Ime has been like a disaster, as we covered earlier. Like, it's like we're just forcing this square peg into a round hole of like, this is a championship team. It's one last dance. It's like, it's just like it's broken.
Point to anything along the way that suggests that is true. Yeah. No, and I think we all fall underneath the romance of it because it's Kevin Durant and Kyrie when he's playing, or when it's James Harden or Ben Simmons and what could be, right? Like, he's supposed to play against Dallas. We won't know that when this airs, but all of these elements. So it's never come together and coalesced. You mentioned Kevin Durant and how he's looked these last couple of games. Is he done with Kyrie Irving from a basketball standpoint? Do you think that is now at the point where he understands, at least from a pure basketball standpoint, if I can't rely on Kyrie Irving to be available, then I can't stick up for him in the same way? I don't know how to sometimes take when Kevin Durant speaks. It's usually fairly boilerplate. I think he's smart with his words. But visually, these last two games, he looks happy. It looks like he's enjoying himself. Now, winning matters, right? And we saw this last year, though. I think when you surround him with some young players, and it's not always going to be wins, it's not always going to look this way, but I think he seems to really enjoy being surrounded by a lot of young talents and veteran players too. And the team seems to play off of him well. Like, is one superstar enough? Is one superstar enough to have some winning? It's not going to be championship, but just to have some winning, to be a playoff team, and maybe let it just be basketball and nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like Durant, they don't like what's out there, you can just write it out for this year and see what offers look like in the summer. I do think at some point he's going to get traded. I wonder if that also, knowing that, is why we're seeing him play a little bit more lively. I'll just be honest, I don't think him and Kyrie play very well together. We have enough.
Let's go basketball here. These last two games, regardless, and then go back to last year when Kyrie wasn't around. What is that? Because you do, obviously, we always talk about your X's and O's and breaking down film around basketball. What is different when it's just Kevin Durant versus when it's Kevin Durant and Kyrie? Because my perception is they like to go possession possession, ISO for ISO at times.
Yeah.
And it loses some of that continuity and that flow. When it's only been Kevin Durant, everybody else knows what your function needs to be, and then Kevin Durant dictates terms about who gets to eat.
For sure. Yeah, it's just more democratic when Durant's out there. I think with Kyrie and KD, you see it when they're playing together, it looks really good because, or at least for the first, especially this year, it's the first 3 quarters, it looks good because one quarter Kyrie's got it going, one quarter, Durant's got it going, and things are working smoothly. It's when they're split up, especially is when it looks good. But when it gets to the crunch time end of games, it just, I don't know. I'm trying to think of what games. There was a game I was at. Maybe it was against the Pacers. I don't know. It was one of these recent games, one of the last games they played together, and it was just it's just a lot of your turn, my turn, which is what everybody joked about when these guys came together, and it was not a reality when they had Harden there. Mm-hmm. Harden, just something about his balance, really helped these two guys play together, mostly because they're both playing a little bit more on off ball. But when it's just Kyrie and KD, I don't know. I always feel like it should have been a greater sum of its than what the parts were. It just, mm-hmm. I don't know. There's just something that was always left on the table a little bit. And I think when, if this is it, if this is the end of 7-11, I'm always going to look back and be super fun to watch. When it was going, but there was always a little something missing for me, just from a basketball perspective. And this isn't X's and O's or anything. This is just more you're trying to take in the vibes of the game, I guess.
Yeah. No, I get. Yeah, I think that's sometimes the hardest thing for Doug and I to discuss, because I think correctly he'll always say, you're always better when you have the best players, right? When they trade James Harden, it was the team isn't getting better from this, and also the overall perception of a game and of seasons, I think, has looked different at times. That stretch last year when it was all the young kids. Now it helps, of course, when they win a handful of those games, right? Then that also changes the way you think about it. But there just seemed to be a better energy about the team overall. This Ben Simmons circumstance now, sore knee. We're recording on Monday afternoon. He's supposed to play Monday night against Dallas. I had mentioned this going back to last week and getting this first initial sample size. Maybe it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but while they're still on the team, how they function together is going to be interesting. Do you think it would make sense for Jacques Vaughn to, and I'll say this going forward, not just isolated in this one game, to consider the idea of having Ben Simmons be in the second unit and build a unit around him and then have a strong unit that supports Kevin Durant? Because I can already see it when you look through this roster. I can give you the Cam Thomases, and you can put Joe Harris into the second unit if you want to have a little more size. Yuta Watanabe. There's enough offense. Like, there's plenty of offense to go around here to put Ben in the point, not even point forward. I'm going to call him the point center role, because I think you also need to remove some of that non-5 mentality out of him, specifically on the offensive end of the court, and obviously get him away from Nicholas Claxton, who seems to flourish when Ben Simmons hasn't been on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think the appeal of this, and it's like the Westbrook situation right now in LA, where it's, circumstances kind of, well, Westbrook is just like, they're trying to make this a strange alignment work. And they're, to their credit, like, Westbrook's been pretty good. Simmons is different. It's obviously an injury, but I could see it helping, like, in terms of just splitting up Claxton, Ben. That's going to be big for them. And I do think you can definitely get away with Simmons at the 5 quite a bit more than maybe we were expecting. I mean, the thing is, though, like, we've talked about this idea of, like, all right, put Ben on the second unit and you put, like, Seth and all these shooters around him. It's like, that's all great, but, like, you do need him to, like, play aggressive. Like, because otherwise, what is he doing? He's, coming off
oversized
a pick and roll.
Soft point guard. What's the problem?
Yeah, and he's, like, picking up his dribble at the free throw line. It's like, I don't think that's going to run that fluidly either. Like, if Ben's going to be what he's been so far, which to me is somebody that looks super hesitant, his lift just, like, isn't there this year.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's injury or what, but this is a guy that was, like, jumping out the gym in Philadelphia, and now he's, like, playing like Blake Griffin.
And I've
heard
Blake
Griffin.
Who's it? Michael? Yeah, not Blake Griffin over Kias. We're talking about late stage Blake Griffin.
Yeah.
And I heard Michael Porter Jr., I remember he was talking about an interview saying, like, he'll get there. I remember with my back and blah, blah, blah. And that's the sentiment we came in with until you saw, and it's not the same injuries, but it's like until you saw Zion coming back from injury and looking fine. Like, so many examples of guys coming back from different injuries and looking pretty in rhythm, just maybe not 100% or 80%. Ben looks like he is 80% on the defensive end and struggling at times to not get what seem like really soft, lazy, inattentive fouls. And then offensively, it just looks like he's not anywhere near it. He's 40% of himself. And that already was a restricted end of his game, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like two things working hand in hand. I actually would say it's even lower than 80% for me defensively. Like, there's just like guys are getting by him a little bit easier. Like, he just isn't moving the same to me. He's got, like, quick hands and big, just good physical frame. But yeah, I mean,
the passing lane work has been, like, good for him, but you're right, though. The one-on-one, keep him in front of you defense hasn't looked nearly as good as you would think.
They don't have anybody that can guard point of attack, which is like, at this point, it's old news, but my goodness, they should have kept Bruce Brown. Like, just for that.
Because we can sidebar into this, because this is, I think, the general state of the team, where you can kind of have as wide-ranging conversations as you want. I thought, obviously, it was a head scratcher initially when they traded a first-round pick for Royce O'Neal. Then he gets here, and in theory, you go, well, he really fits in. I don't know if it's ever worth it, but maybe it's worth it. But I made the case, the other thing that would have been really smart to do was also have kept Bruce Brown. If you had Royce O'Neal and Bruce Brown, now you have that guy doing it, both units, flexing, just everything, the value that they bring.
Yeah, because people were like, "Oh, this is the Bruce Brown replacement," and I'm like, they don't really play alike. Like, Bruce is just tough to dust at point of attack. Like, he's such a good screen navigator. He's really quick moving laterally, just with, like, kind of like his, I don't even know what's the word for it. Just his footwork is, like, really good at being these choppy steps on closeouts. He's good at moving well. Royce is, like, really not been good at all guarding the perimeter this year. I mean, at this point, he's what, 30? He's really somebody that I like more guarding whatever. I don't even know. Valanciunas,
I know what you mean. Yeah, the physical, the size, the mass is what you like out of him more defensively than the versatility.
Low base, he's really good at fronting the post. He's just like somebody that he's a little bit more of like that rangy wing that's going to guard size versus, hey, we want you guarding Darius Garland up top, and we feel pretty good about that. Like that, and that was one of the things I was, pretty concerned about coming into the season about the Nets. I liked everything they were doing defensively. I thought they were doing different schemes, but my worry was, like, if you can't guard guys up top and you're letting dribble penetration happen over and over and over, like, what does that do to the rest of your defense? How are you, kind of rotating out from there if you're doing that all game? And yeah, I that has kind of come true pretty early in the season for me.
Yeah. And wouldn't you know it, it hasn't looked so good on that end.
For sure.
Coming up in a second, we'll just close out this this conversation with some what feels like maybe imminent changes that are going to be coming for this team in the near future, and what does the Brooklyn Nets organization look like going forward. Okay, we will finish out having this discussion with Matt Brooks, taking a look, obviously, at some of the players that have shown up this year for Brooklyn, but ultimately, we'll try to prod him one more time for where he thinks this is all going to end. It's obviously a difficult one for anyone to put their finger on where it all shakes out for Brooklyn. But before we do, gotta tell you about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports wagering information, stats, news, and analysis all season long for all your sports. You want the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball, soccer, and esports. We've got it all over there on betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those on BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. That's what they tell us. And you can head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it is where the game starts. And now, let's close it out with Matt Brooks. Okay, so you talk about Royce O'Neal there. Now we're at this point where, by all indications, you think that at some point Kevin Durant will be traded between now and the deadline. We can put it out that far. Could be a lot sooner potentially. Is there, just I guess briefly on this, is there anything they can accomplish that makes Kevin Durant want to stick around here? And I know, listen, short of continuing to win basketball games, but they already had a rough start to the season. I won't bother asking you the weirdness of him demanding a trade or you fire Steve Nash. They say they're not going to do that, but then they essentially do it. They just wait 7 games. Is there anything they can accomplish that changes Kevin Durant's perception of where he was this offseason?
I mean, if they continue to win and they play this fun freestyle of basketball, sure, I guess that could happen. I think part of it would also just be if we make it to the deadline and the Nets are we don't want to take whatever, Ayton and I don't know, Cam Johnson and some picks. We're just Durant's playing out of his mind. We don't feel good about that. I think that could be a situation too. I also would argue the other way though, for the Nets. It's this is the year, I think, of any of them. If you're going to bottom out and you're just going to suck, this is not a bad year to do it. You have a swap with Houston, so you could be looking at a 5-6 overall pick.
Is that what safe? Is that pick from Houston? That is safe, right? The Brooklyn Nets
are
locked in.
Because the Rockets suck. So it's
no. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean in terms of yes. The Rockets are gonna be bad. I just meant that pick is locked in. That doesn't get sacrificed anywhere else because so much of their draft capital has always been subject to some other caveat. But if Houston is bad, they get that pick.
Yeah. I mean, so because then it'll just be all right, let's say the Nets somehow win the lottery. It's all right, cool. But then they get Houston's pick, which is probably going to be in the top 6 or, it's the odds are different, but for at least the lottery. But at a certain point, it's this is actually not the worst year to just completely have the bottom fall out and trade everybody, trade Royce at the deadline, trade Seth at the deadline, see if he can get something for Joe. It wouldn't be the worst outcome. And I do wonder if that's where we're headed. Now, granted, again, it just depends on how things go. If this team does kind of manage to string together a winning streak, do they buy it? Or do they realize, hey, this is probably a little fool's goldie, we're performing above expectations. We have a bunch of young guys in the rotation that are just clawing it out. Because I think it's fair to say, if Kyrie is not, a part of this team going forward, I don't care who they hire or if Ime gets hired or whoever, whatever they do with this team's not going anywhere. They're just not.
And when you look at, because they'll play again tonight against Dallas, at Dallas, they'll come home against New York. And I noted this the other day, that then they go into a stretch of the West Coast swing, Clippers, Lakers, Kings, and the Trailblazers. They'll come home just for Memphis, and then another road trip with Philly, Toronto, and the Pacers. And then they get a really nice long stretch at home. But they have a ton of road games. I mean, just regardless of whether or not you're playing great basketball or otherwise, road games are always harder to win. These 2 games have been nice, and we could be about to get a little bit, more of a dose of reality of where this team is. You mentioned all of these different players and pieces. Does anything change for you in terms of it's such an irony? Whatever the market was for Kevin Durant in the offseason and what teams were willing to give you, you got to believe that when teams are now calling, and it's been reported that everyone wants to re-engage in these discussions, that they're going to come right back to the table and say, so I'll take one of those picks off that I was offering you in the offseason. Like
Yeah.
it's a desperate team. It's a broken franchise potentially. So anything that you're going to do you think they may just have to sacrifice pennies on the dollar? Maybe not at that level of Kevin Durant, but the Currys, the O'Neals, the Harrises of the world if they go that way?
Yeah, I mean, you might not get like that marquee young player. You know,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that's kind of what it looks like. You know, maybe I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell though. Like we never know with this stuff. Like maybe Toronto's like, I mean, I guess we'd rather just have Durant than Scotty Barnes, who was like, look, okay, he's fine.
Right.
Had some good moments, but you know that's a pretty risky move on their part to.
We always push back on that, and not that we understood it, but the idea of Toronto or any team being like, we're not giving you Scotty Barnes, but you understand. Like I get it. Nobody loves a young player more than me. Like, and I fell in love when they signed Yuta Watanabe, and I won't back off it. I love the kid, and he's 27.
Yeah.
But
the
idea of like what a player could be versus like, but you know what Kevin Durant is, right? And I think fans of their team always get lost in that thing of, Scotty Barnes could be like, is like such a different dynamic. I'm surprised sometimes when I hear fans talk like that.
And they're good. Like that's a team that's like, man, if you're Toronto and you're like, we actually are like have a real chance at winning it this year. Like if we add somebody like Durant and Van Vliet's like healthy enough, Siakam is obviously playing out of his mind. Like that's a pretty interesting team. And I would do it if I'm Toronto and, whatever, like, Scotty Barnes is a really promising player. He's got things to work on like any young player. Jump shot needs to come along. I think some of his defense can be a little bit hot and cold. And like, if you're Toronto and you're like, wow, we could have Kevin Durant playing like this right now. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it's this foregone conclusion that it's like, yeah, Scotty Barnes is our franchise guy, so we're not going to do anything. I don't know. Yeah. I wouldn't feel so confident about that if I'm Toronto. So that's like, that's a guy that like at the beginning of the year, he's coming off rookie of the year. And it's like, we're not trading a rookie of the year, but if we get halfway through his sophomore season and it's been like good, maybe not great. Hey, that actually might be a guy that you're getting.
Jacques Vaughn for coach of the year. Is that the way we're trending right now? I got to be honest with you, man. I have so much respect for Jacques Vaughn.
Yeah.
Chance to be the coach, loses the coaching job. They still paid him really well. So it's not like it was for, it wasn't just for the love of being on the staff, but he essentially is just bobbed up and down, coaching, not coaching, interim head coach, maybe the coach for the rest of the season with the way things are trending. Did you notice anything significantly different just in those two games? I mean, obviously the one that jumped out at you was Cam Thomas seemed to be buried.
Yeah.
And when we had talked about him, it was the idea, well, the coaching staff says you need to be more of a facilitator. You need to show some point guard ability. You need to be a fluid player offensively. We know be a speed bump and that's good enough. But with the way you saw Patty Mills playing to start the year, it just felt like, why not? And immediately as soon as that happened, obviously with no Kyrie, but you saw Cam get out there and he does look like he's taking that next step forward. Do you like what you're seeing from him developmentally?
From Cam or just Vaughn?
Yeah, we could do both. Yeah, well, you know what?
Sure.
From Cam as a player, but that's actually a really good one. A really good question is like, do you see differences in the way Jacques Vaughn has coached these couple of games versus just the way you perceived him in years prior?
I'll start with Cam. Like Cam's playmaking looks better. I like that first off, like he's one of the few guys that can like toss. I don't feel like Kyrie or KD really toss lobs very much. And like Cam's pretty comfortable doing it to Clax. Like, and I was not ready for that. He's got the little dump offs too. If he beats his man, guy rotates over, he's pretty comfortable getting into Clax. Like those two guys, if that's going to be how they play together, like that's not a bad starting spot for the Nets if they do like tear things down and we get to that road. So I've been impressed by Cam. I think that for me just shows like, this is a guy like, look, he's Cam is a very confident player. There are things where it's like, oh man, like the free CT thing on his Instagram. Like, look, he's a guy, he believes in himself a lot. It's probably like the polite way to put it, but that's fine if he's like showing improvement. I'd really buy him as like a guy that, maybe this is your version of whatever. I don't want to go like as high as Tyrese Maxey, but maybe that's the Nets version of this, like a really nice, good young guard that is something going forward. So I like it. I've been impressed by him. And I think making those steps as a player and taking those steps as a passer, which was his biggest thing he really needed to work on, is a good sign for me. Vaughn, Vaughn is, first off, I feel like he just knows his hoops. Like you listen to it. And like, again, like post-game pressers, whatever.
It's very night and day, though. It is very. I will say,
he
for
talks,
as much as
man.
we defended Steve Nash as saying like everything that went on, and there's obviously a lot of things to grind him about, but most of his post-game press conferences were about attitude or approach or just intensity. Jacques Vaughn, like you said, he walks in there and he's like, yeah, there are things that we were specifically doing, how we wanted to change, what sets looked like, and it does read differently in the room, at least when you hear those clips.
Yeah, he's a hoop set. Transcribing him the other day, I was like, oh wow, we're talking about like gapping and low men and stuff like that, like just stuff that I hadn't heard Nash talk about a ton. And I'm not saying like that's not to say like Nash wasn't instructing the team like, hey, we want to like defend off ball this way. Like that was just something they were never doing because he's an NBA coach and they have an NBA coach staff. Of course they're doing that, but it is interesting to hear Vaughn kind of talk about this stuff to media and I just think it's an interesting approach. I think the other thing for me with Vaughn is like young players just seem to really play hard for him, which I think tracks all the way back to the bubble. Now, maybe that's more of a circumstance thing because much like the bubble, you have a bunch of guys just like playing for their next contract, playing for another job, or playing just to show who they are as young players in the league. That might be the situation here, but regardless, it's happened under Vaughn multiple times. So if this does go the direction that we've talked about a couple of times of like, hey, this is probably at end of the road, we're going to get what we can get for Durant and just kind of move forward from here. I don't know if Vaughn's the worst guy, at least for the foreseeable future. If this is a young team and guys are playing well for him and, if he's that guy, that's perfect. Like that's kind of what you want. And you've stumbled into that. I think it's been promising so far.
Yeah, same thing. And maybe it's just because you're looking for any glimmer of thing to be, excited about in a lot of ways. Maybe just one last or two questions here. The first one just being, is this an homage? Are you building in the direction of having a Jacques Vaughn style beard? Is that the intention here for Matt Brooks?
Yeah, I got the KD, Royce O'Neal, like I don't.
Yeah, it is. You're merging. Yeah, you're merging some styles actually.
Yeah,
it's not bad.
It's an homage to everybody on the team. I got a little Joe Harris in there. No, I mean I don't know.
Joe Harris, maybe a headband's coming in soon.
We'll see. I'll do multiple things with it this year. I didn't realize I could grow facial hair until this year, so it's been just a whole new world for me. I had no idea.
Things are opening up.
You learn at 28.
Yeah, lots going to change from Matt Brooks. 2022, it's a year of evolution. We didn't talk about Ben Simmons. We really don't need to, as far as what this organization thinks about him, because I think it doesn't matter if it's over, then he kind of doesn't matter either. You think it's over. How soon do you think it's fully over? Like, do you think that this makes it to the deadline before they jettison it? Do you think that Kyrie Irving ever does step back out on the court? It's the 5-game. They're 2 games into his 5-game suspension. Do you think they even bother trying to showcase him in any way, potentially to try to move him? Or is it just, enjoy the young players, enjoy the young talent, and don't really concern yourself with the idea of salvaging this? Like, you think that is off the table? Well, and I don't mean at a championship level, just off the table of keeping Kevin Durant, having Kyrie rejoin this team and still be the version of this team this year with Kevin Durant, Kyrie.
The Kyrie thing, I think like the showcasing was probably those first 7 games.
Right.
And then, everything that happened. So I don't know. I guess time heals all wounds. And if he shows that he's, committed to learning from his mistakes, that does matter. And we've seen that happen time and time again. People get second chances. I kind of in the camp. I don't see him playing another game for the Nets. And that's just off personal opinion. Again, as I said earlier, when we talked about Kyrie, I have no clue. It's kind of in Kyrie's, the ball is in Kyrie's court and who knows? Really, that's the best I can do with things with Kyrie now. And then as for the team, as I said, there's a world where if they don't feel like they're going to get fair value for KD, maybe they roll it out and say, hey, a really good playoff run could really help us. And maybe there's more suitors next summer. You
have him under contract. You can let that kind of go. I guess the needle mover will be if the team is losing a lot of games and whether or not you'd like to hold on to him at some point. I think Kevin Durant will start to re-engage those talks.
For sure. Yeah. And I think there's certainly a reality where they start to lose games. This might just be a group that's really excited to be playing with a new head coach and playing without any extra added drama, and it's a bunch of young guys that are playing really well. But we've seen that in the past, that stuff can fade and reality and that regression hits in a little bit. So I don't know. I'm enjoying the basketball for now, but
Yeah.
I'm also not like gonna assume that the Nets are gonna win every game ever again. Like, I'm just happy we have a little bit of basketball to be excited about in the meantime.
Ironically enough, I had low level in my mind, looked at Dallas as being a team that should have been in conversations to try to get Kevin Durant there,
Mhm.
because it's the absolutely right fit. It's a team that's on the, team that maybe overachieved slightly last year and knows that they could get back there if they had the arsenal to do it. I have to do this because the fan base demands it. How much do you love Yuta Watanabe? And then we'll let you go.
He's awesome.
He does just enough, right? He's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
enough of everything. It's really the confirmation I want, because I don't know the X's and O's well enough. But when I went and watched him after they signed him, I thought, oh, he's just big enough and athletic enough, unlike other guys they don't have. He has just enough outside shooting. He can do just enough defensively, and he can take the ball and bring it up the court just enough. Like, it's all just enoughs. But sometimes when you check boxes at a B- level, but you check 5 or 6 of them, it actually adds up to being a really strong complementary player.
The Nets have had a guy like this every year, like Nwaba the first year, and
Yep.
then Bruce Brown, and then DeAndre Bembry last year, and now it's Yuta. Like, they're really good at finding these toolsy jack of all trades guys that just sort of fill gaps. And I think part of that is just, you play next to Kyrie and KD, and Yuta has commented on this. Like, his role is really simplified.
Yeah.
Like, be attentive as an off-ball defender, rebound well, and then just shoot threes. And he's shot the ball really well. Like, that's been a nice revelation for the Nets to get that from Yuta. We'll see if it sticks, but like, by all accounts, the form looks good from my untrained eye. And it's like, yeah, like, it's exciting. So it's cool to see that they've kind of done this again with this like just perfect role player. And he's great. He's just like, just seems like a super nice dude too. He's so
nice. To the point where like just a group of super nice dudes would almost be like a welcome change for Nets fans. Like, you know what? This is a nice guy. He's out there trying his hardest.
Yeah, man.
I'll even give Dayron a pass sometimes. I'm like, what though? I see him. He's always smiling. He's just happy to be a part of it. It will be interesting to see. I'm sure there will come a time, maybe sooner than we would prefer, that we'll be having Matt back on to talk about the next wave of things that happens here. As it stands right now, the Brooklyn Nets have won 2 games in a row at the time of this recording. Kevin Durant seems incredibly happy, and it can only go up from here. Matt Brooks on Twitter at Matt Brooks NBA, also on the Clear Out podcast over on Blue Wire, and of course reporting for Nets Daily. As always, man, let the beard flow, and thank you for making time for us. We really appreciate it.
It's good to be back. Thank you.